Our next guest, my friends, is Mark Mix. Mark Mix is president of the National Right to Work Committee, which has over 2.8 million member policy organization. He also serves, Mark does, as the president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. And Mark's been on with us before. Great guest. It's so nice to have you back on, Mark. You heard that John Kerry soundbite that I played from, I guess, about 10 days ago, where that sanctimonious, you-know-what, basically tells people, if you're working in the dirty oil industry, go get a job as a solar technician, solar panels made in China. Mark, I have to tell you, I never thought that I would see this country in the position that it's in. But before we get to talking about what's going on with respect to employment, current employment problems caused by the new puppet regime in Washington, your organization has been working with those who have been trying to decertify the union at the Mountaire plant in Dagsboro. I was wondering, has there been any negative ramifications since the change in administration? And have the Biden administration, have they tried to thwart the attempts to decertify the union, those representing workers at the Mountaire plant in Dagsboro? Can you give us an update on what's going on there, Mark?
Well, Jake, the administration's only been in 4 weeks, and you're already predicting and posting exactly what they're doing, and they are. They're trying to engage, and they're trying to block the ability of the Mountaire workers to decide for themselves whether or not they want the union to represent them anymore. Just to give a quick little thumbnail sketch of what happened.
Yeah.
Basically, the union negotiated an illegal contract with Mountaire that basically required workers to pay union dues immediately upon taking their jobs. That's a violation of federal law.
Yep.
And so we represented employees there. There are about 800 workers there that have said they would like a chance to vote to decertify the union. Because this illegal contract has a provision that can't be defended by either the union or the employer, the regional director of the National Labor Relations Board, which is the agency that governs the private sector labor management relations from the federal government in Washington, D.C., said that, no, you can't have the election because there's this thing called the contract bar, which is non-statutory. It's simply a regulatory provision that the NLRB created that says you can't vote to throw out your union for up to 3 years if this contract bar applies. Well, the fact is there was an illegal clause that vitiated the contract bar, saying that that doesn't apply here. So the workers there got to cast votes, but the votes got impounded pending a National Labor Relations Board decision about whether or not the contract bar would apply. Right. Well, interestingly enough, Jake, and you're right on target, the current general counsel, who is now acting after President Biden fired the general counsel that was there that had 10 months left on his term, and then fired the acting general counsel that replaced him and put in their own, he has asked for the withdrawal of the brief that the general counsel filed in the case, supporting the workers' right to have a vote. So he wanted that statement withdrawn from the record, and he wanted to submit a new brief that would say, holy mackerel, these workers should have no voice whether or not to throw the union out.
Unbelievable.
And the contract bar should block them. And fortunately, while the general counsel's first brief, the old general counsel's brief, was withdrawn from the court proceedings, the NLRB voted not to let the general counsel submit a new brief that would defend forced unionism in this particular situation. So no surprise to you, Jake, no surprise to me. The Biden administration, as you intimated in the lead-in here, they are all in and gave an early Valentine's Day present to organized labor back just a week ago about forcing every worker in America to pay union dues to get or keep a job.
Now, it's no secret that workers in chicken plants and in the Mountaire plant in Dagsboro are primarily Hispanic or Latino Americans. Now, the Socialist Democrats keep claiming that they're the friend of the Latino worker and trying to take a voice away from these workers to decide for themselves what better fits their situation, their employment situation, is a very interesting issue, isn't it?
Indeed it is, Jake. But, here's the deal. I mean, under current law, both federal law and state law, there is nothing that stops workers from trying to organize unions. I mean, employers can stand up and say, we don't like that, but the workers have that choice. And here what they're doing is they're saying, you can get into this particular situation, but you can never get out. And that's really the injustice. This is truly a case against workers, and the government steps in and puts their thumb on the scale in favor of union officials that have this power and ignore workers' ability, their rights to decide whether or not they want to be in a union. You're exactly right.
What were your thoughts when you saw immediately that China's puppet Joe Biden put the kibosh on the Keystone XL pipeline. There were other things obviously going on. The president of the AFL-CIO, Richard Trumka, I guess that's how you pronounce his name, he slammed China's puppet Joe Biden for his actions taken, which really eliminated thousands and thousands of high-paying union jobs. Well, I could have told you that this was going to happen. Richard Trumka obviously knew this was going to happen because the rank and file of his union locals were telling him that this was going to happen. That's why they were supporting Donald Trump. So what do you make of what's going on now, and what's going to be the pushback or the punishment for this administration, do you think, Mark?
Well, I don't think there'll be any punishment from Richard Trumka. In fact, if you look at the entirety of his interview on HBO or whatever that was a weekend ago, while he cried crocodile tears over this move by his buddy Joe Biden,
right,
he did say this. He conditioned on Jake. He said he should have paired it with something else. Going back to your original point, maybe this perception that government creates jobs, like John Kerry,
right,
as he rushed out of that press conference to get on his private jet. You know, these people think that government produce things, and they don't. They don't produce anything, and yet here they are. Here's Trump saying, you know, we're disappointed with what he did. If he would have just paired it with, you know, creating solar jobs or solar jobs, that would have been better. But here to rank and file workers that are on the unemployment line out in the Midwest who were on the job at the Keystone Pipeline, who voted for Donald Trump, who supported Donald Trump, and yet their union officials took their money as a condition of their employment, where they're not employed in right-to-work states, and used it to elect a president that put them out of work. This is exactly why forced unionism doesn't work. This is exactly why we need to stand up for workers' rights to exercise those rights under the law. Perfect example.
Can you discern for our audience the difference between a right-to-work state and a non-right-to-work state? Because I think there's some confusion as to the differences between some states. Can you discern from a legal standpoint, Mark? And our guest, by the way, if you're just tuning in, is Mark Mix, the president of the National Right-to-Work Committee. Can you discern the difference between the two?
Yeah, Jake, it's really simple, and thank goodness it's really simple for my sake, because basically, yeah, for me, I'm not a lawyer, and we have enough of those in the country, and we've got 22 of them that work at our foundation that represent employees every day, including the workers at Mountaire. But here's what it is, Jake. Every state in the country allows, and federal law allows, workers to organize unions if they choose to voluntarily.
Right.
The federal law, going back to 1935 and 1947, the combination of the Wagner Act and Taft-Hartley Act make up our federal labor policy. The federal default in the law is that union officials can have a worker fired if they don't tender dues or fees as a condition of working. I mean, it's an outrage. There's forced unionism in the federal law. That federal law blanketed the entire nation at the time. In 1947, Congress came back and said, you know, we probably went too far. We need to do something to rein in the power that union officials had. Because during 35 to 47, John L. Lewis and the coal mining industry and literally union officials across the country nearly shut the country down. At one time, there were over 4 million private sector workers striking across the country after World War II. And they said, we've got to change this. And one of the changes they initiated in the Taft-Hartley Act was a section called 14B. And that 14B section basically said to the states, you get the privilege, if you can, by affirmative action, to outlaw the so-called closed shop union,
right,
which means you have to pay dues to get a job. So from 1947 till today, states have been able to pass right-to-work laws. They don't stop anyone from joining a union. They don't stop anyone from participating in a union. They don't stop anyone from giving their entire paycheck to a union if they choose to do so.
Right.
But it gives workers the right not to if they choose not to. That's a right-to-work law in a nutshell, Jake. It's real simple.
Now, can you give us your assessment of where employment law is, in other words, the NLRB, the Department of Labor, where is it going under a Biden administration? What are we going to be looking at? What do you see, Mark Mix, president of the National Right-to-Work Committee, what do you see happening for the next 4 years, and how is it going to affect in future employment in this country?
Well, we know that 23 minutes into the new administration, while the echoes of Garth Brooks singing Amazing Grace across the Capitol Plaza were echoing back to the stage, an email went out to the General Counsel of the National Labor Relations Board saying that if he didn't resign, he was going to be fired by 5 that afternoon. that he got fired at 5 that afternoon. The next morning, the acting general counsel for the NLRB got the same email saying, if you don't resign by 5 o'clock, you will be fired. That acting general counsel was fired that next day. Joe Biden puts Peter Orr, the regional director of the Chicago National Labor Relations Board, in charge, and immediately upon him taking office, he issues a memorandum rescinding 10 memorandums that were issued by the previous general counsel, 4 of which were directly related to our cases representing employees, rolling back the power and the authority of the general counsel to allow workers to have some rights under the act. So what we will have over the next 4 years, or the next 2, depending how things turn out in 22, you will have an NLRB that takes the side of big labor bosses and or big business over the rights of individual workers who allegedly, Jake, and I say allegedly because it doesn't work this way, it was written so that workers would have some rights. Who has rights under a Joe Biden NLRB? Big business and big labor. And those are the two voices, and they compete with each other, and most of the time big business sells out. Union officials never do because they want more power over more workers to collect more dues to elect more politicians, and that vicious cycle continues. And it will continue at a higher rate of speed over the next 2 years for sure.
Mark, how can yours truly and my listeners assist you at the National Right to Work Committee? What can we do to get involved, and what can we do to support you and your organization?
Well, Jake, what you're doing today is probably the most important thing in this grand experiment of self-government, transparency. We need to tell the American people and the people of Delaware and Maryland and Virginia really what's happening in Washington, D.C. We're all caught up in the activities of the day and the headlines of the day, but we need to pay attention to what the people in Washington, D.C. are doing. So your role of getting transparency and getting the word out is very important. Others, they can basically come to us and find out what their politicians are doing on labor policy by going to our website, looking at the bills that have been introduced in Delaware, bills that have been introduced in Congress. All that information, so you know what's happening in your state as it relates to labor law, can be found at nrtwc.org. That's the committee's website, nrtwc.org.
National Right to Work Committee, right?
That's correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure I had that right. Mark Mix, thank you so much. This is the first time we've had you on this year. I suspect we're going to have you on quite frequently in the months ahead. Mark Mix, president of the National Right to Work Committee. Mark, thank you so much for coming on, giving us the assessment. As hard as it is to understand, at least, again, we know what's happening. And thank you for updating us on what's happening in the at the plant, the Mountaire plant in Dagsboro.
Thanks, Jake. It's a pleasure to be on with you.
All right. Have a great day. You're listening to Delmarva Live on 92.7 WGMD, WGMD.com, and via your WGMD app.